The judge picked up the folder I'd set on his desk, opened it to the first page, and went completely still. I watched him from across the courtroom. His eyes moved down slowly, then to the next page, then the next. His clerk leaned in and said something to him. He held up one hand without looking at her. Not yet. He kept reading. I had driven to that courthouse that morning expecting to lose. I want to be honest about that up front. I walked in with a folder of papers and no illusions because the law on paper was not on my side. Gloria's attorney had been very clear about that in the hallway 2 weeks earlier when he looked at me with the kind of patience people use with someone who doesn't understand the situation. He explained that biological relation creates presumptive rights, that I had no formal adoption on record, that in the state of Ohio a step-parent who never legally adopted a child has limited standing in a custody dispute, that I was legally speaking fighting uphill in a rainstorm. He wasn't wrong about any of it. But then my daughter walked into that courtroom and did something nobody had asked her to do. She said 3 words into the microphone in a voice that didn't waver at all, and those 3 words did what 7 months of legal motion and counter-motion had not been able to do. They ended it. I need to tell you who I am before I can tell you how we got there, because the facts only mean something if you understand the ground they happened on. I'm 42 and I run a small electrical contracting business out of Columbus, Ohio. Just me and 3 guys I've worked with for years, pulling wire in new construction, doing service calls, fixing the things that go wrong in the walls of other people's houses. It's not glamorous and it doesn't make anyone rich, but it's honest, and I've done it since I was 22 and never wanted to do anything else. My truck has 240,000 miles on it. I have a house in Westerville with a leaky back gutter I keep meaning to fix. I coach youth soccer on Saturday mornings. That's my life and I like it. 12 years ago, I married a woman named Teresa. I want to tell you the truth about her from the beginning, because she is the whole foundation of this story, and she deserves to be seen clearly. Teresa was 31 when I met her, and she had a 2-year-old daughter named Vivien. Vivien's biological father had been out of the picture since before she was born, not missing, not complicated, just gone. He found out Teresa was pregnant and decided that wasn't the direction his life was going. He moved to Portland, never sent a card, never called, never made any attempt to be anything to that little girl. He was an absence with a name, and eventually Teresa stopped even saying the name. I met Teresa at a friend's 4th of July cookout in Dublin. She was standing by the back fence with a red plastic cup of lemonade, watching her 2-year-old do something very serious with a stick in the grass. She had a look on her face, not tired exactly, but focused, like she was always tracking where Vivien was, where the edges of the yard were, where the nearest adult was. A mother's constant background calculus. I found out later it was something she did automatically by then, like breathing. We talked for 2 hours next to that fence, not about anything profound, Columbus traffic, whether the local Mexican place was worth the wait, movies we'd seen recently. The whole time, Vivien made her stick do whatever it was sticks do, and every few minutes Teresa glanced down at her, and every few minutes Vivien glanced up to confirm the world was still in order. I noticed something that afternoon I've thought about many times since. Vivien never looked for anyone else. It was always just her mom. There was no one else in that little girl's world to look for. I started thinking about that on the drive home. I don't know why it stayed with me the way it did, but it did. Teresa and I dated for 8 months before I met Vivien properly, because Teresa was careful about that and I respected it completely. You don't introduce someone to your child until you know who that someone is. When she finally did, a Saturday morning at a pancake place in Worthington, Vivien was nearly 3, and she looked at me across the table with the flat, measuring suspicion that only small children and cats can fully achieve, and announced that she did not like blueberries. I said that was a very reasonable position, and I didn't like them either, which was a lie. I love blueberries. But she looked at me differently after that, like maybe I wasn't entirely useless. I proposed to Teresa 11 months later. We married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Clintonville. Vivien was the flower girl and took the job extremely seriously, scattering petals with the focus of a professional. I want to say something here about what I knew and what I chose, because it matters the way it matters in the bone of this whole story. I knew Vivien wasn't biologically mine from day one, and it was never a question I wrestled with or a doubt I pushed down. I married Teresa knowing she came with Vivien, and in my mind they were a single fact, not 2 separate considerations. You don't get Teresa without Vivien. I didn't want to. From the beginning I was just there. I showed up and kept showing up, and that's the whole philosophy, if it even rises to the level of philosophy. More like a decision you make, and then make again every morning without really noticing you're making it, until it's just the shape of your life. Vivien called me by my first name for about a year. Then one evening when she was 4, she came into the kitchen while I was cooking dinner, climbed up on the step stool she used to reach the counter and said, without any preamble, "Can I call you Dad?" I turned the burner down. I looked at her standing there with complete seriousness, waiting for an answer. I said, "Yeah, Viv, I'd like that a lot." She nodded like it was settled, climbed back down, and went back to whatever she'd been doing. No ceremony, no big moment. Just a 4-year-old who decided how things were going to be. I'll tell you some of what the years looked like, not because I'm asking for credit, but because it's the thing this whole story is about, and I want it specific instead of vague. I taught her to ride a bike in the driveway when she was 5. The training wheels came off on a Tuesday after school. She fell 4 times and got back up 4 times, and on the 5th try she made it to the end of the driveway while I ran behind her shouting, and she was laughing. I can still hear it exactly. The laugh of someone who just figured out she could do something she wasn't sure about. I took her to every soccer game and every school concert, including the one in 2nd grade where she stood in the back row of the choir and sang with total commitment to the wrong melody, while the teacher kept glancing at her with the expression of someone trying to solve a problem politely. I cheered anyway. Loudest, actually. When she was 8 and her best friend said something cruel about her hair, the kind of casual cruelty kids produce without knowing they're doing it, she came home and said nothing at dinner, but I could see it on her face. After Teresa went to do the dishes, I sat on the edge of Vivien's bed and asked what was wrong. She told me. I told her the truth, that some people say things like that because they don't know how to be kind, and it had nothing to do with her hair, which was great. She said my opinion didn't count because I was her dad and had to say that. I said fine, she could think that, but I also happened to be right. She laughed, not big, but enough. Teresa and I had a good marriage. We had the normal friction of 2 people sharing a life, money worries, scheduling conflicts, disagreements about how loud the TV should be, and we worked through it the way you do when you actually want to. I thought we had decades in front of us. I thought I'd sit on a porch with Teresa when we were old and watch Vivien's kids do something ridiculous in the yard. When Vivien was 10, Teresa started having abdominal pain that didn't go away. I'm going to be brief about what happened next, not because it doesn't matter, but because I can't give it the space it deserves without this becoming a different story, and Teresa deserves more than a plot point. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer that November, stage 3. The oncologist used words like aggressive and treatable and will fight this, and I sat beside her holding her hand, trying to understand the shape of what we were looking at. We fought it for 14 months. Surgery, chemo, the whole brutal process anyone who's been close to it knows. Teresa fought with more grace than I could have managed. She was patient on the days she couldn't get out of bed. She made dark jokes about her hair falling out, then winked at Vivien and said now they both had hair problems, which made Vivien laugh, then cry, then laugh again. Teresa died in January, a week after Vivien's 11th birthday. She was 43. I'm not going to tell you what that was like, because I don't have the words and I'm not sure words exist for it. What I'll tell you is that the day after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, not doing anything, barely thinking, just sitting. Vivien came downstairs in her pajamas at 7 in the morning, looked at me and I looked at her, and she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me from behind, the way a kid does when they're too big to sit in your lap anymore. She didn't say anything, she just held on. She was 11 years old and she was comforting me. I understood in that moment that the 2 of us were going to be okay because we had each other, and that was enough to build on. For 3 years it was the 2 of us. We figured it out. I learned how to make her lunch the right way, which changed every 4 months without warning. I went to middle school orientation and sat in the gymnasium surrounded by 2-parent couples and didn't feel like half a thing. I was there. That's all being there is. You show up and you keep showing up. We had a system. Sunday nights we made dinner together. Her job was the salad, my job was whatever was on the stove, both our jobs was the cleanup. We watched movies on Friday nights, alternating picks. Hers were always better, I will not tell her that. Vivien grew up. Of course she did. She went from 11 to 14, got quieter in some ways and louder in others, developed opinions about things she hadn't previously had opinions about, and pushed back on me sometimes. I let her push back when she was right and held the line when she wasn't. That's just parenting. That's the whole job. Then Teresa's older sister Gloria filed for custody. I want to be fair to Gloria because that's the only way I can tell this story honestly. She loved Teresa, that much was real. They were close growing up and Teresa's death hit her hard. In the months after the funeral, Gloria was good to Vivien. She called, she visited, she took her shopping for school supplies that fall. I appreciated all of it, I told her so. What I didn't understand until her attorney contacted me the following September was that Gloria had been quietly building a different opinion about me. The letter was 3 pages long and very politely devastating. It said Gloria had concerns about Vivien's welfare in my care, that as Teresa's surviving biological family, Gloria believed she could provide more stability, that I had no legal adoption of Vivien on record, which was accurate. Teresa and I had talked about it, started the process once, and let it stall when the cancer diagnosis came and everything else pushed it aside, and that in the absence of formal adoption, my standing as a guardian was, in the attorney's words, less clear than one might assume. I called Gloria directly. We talked for 40 minutes. She was calm, not unkind. She said she worried about Vivien's future, that she felt Vivien needed family, real family, and that maybe it was time for Vivien to be with people actually connected to Teresa. I asked her what she thought I was connected to. She didn't answer that directly. She said she was doing what she thought was best for Vivien. I said I believed her. I also said I wasn't going to give up my daughter. The conversation ended there. The next 7 months were the worst of my life since Teresa died, not because the legal process was dramatic. Mostly it was paperwork and waiting and phone calls with an attorney I'd hired at no small expense, and hearings that got postponed and depositions where people said careful things under oath. It was grinding, exhausting in the specific way that fighting for something you love is exhausting, where you can't stop thinking about it even when you try to sleep. My attorney, a woman named Judith who had the energy of someone who'd seen everything and was annoyed by most of it, told me early on that the legal reality was complicated. No adoption record, no biological connection. Ohio courts default toward biological family when there's genuine ambiguity. Gloria had a stable income, a house in Upper Arlington, a husband, no criminal record. On paper, she looked like stability. On paper, I looked like a technicality. About 4 months in, there was a night I sat in my truck in the parking lot outside the soccer fields where I coached, and I thought about giving up. Not giving up Vivien, I want to be clear about that. I mean giving up the idea that the legal system was going to see what was actually true. I thought about what a full trial would do to her. I thought about what it had already done. She knew, in the way teenagers always know, that something serious was happening. She hadn't asked me directly. I think she was afraid to. I sat in that parking lot a long time, then I drove home. I don't know exactly what changed my mind, except that when I walked in, Vivien was at the kitchen table doing homework, and she looked up and said, "How was practice?" I said, "Fine," and she went back to her homework, and I stood there thinking, I am not explaining to this person why I stopped fighting for her. That is not a conversation I will have. So I kept fighting. About 3 weeks before the final hearing, I was up late going through old files, looking for a document Judith had requested from when Teresa and I were first married, and I found a box in the back of the hall closet that Teresa had put together years earlier, one of those file boxes people keep for tax returns, insurance policies, that kind of thing. Inside was a folder, and inside that folder was everything. Medical records from Vivien's pediatric checkups going back to when she was 3, school enrollment forms with my signature on them every year, 1st grade through 8th, permission slips from field trips, the receipt from the emergency room the night 7-year-old Vivien fell off the back deck and needed stitches in her chin, my name on the intake form as the responsible party, report cards, her first passport application listing me as father, a letter from her 3rd grade teacher addressed to Vivien's parents, and a Christmas card Vivien had made in that same class on construction paper folded in half, on the front in crayon, for Mom and Dad. Inside, a drawing of 3 people of wildly different heights standing in front of a house that appeared to be on fire, but was probably just decorated for the holidays. 12 years of a life, a whole childhood documented in a folder in a closet. Teresa had put it together herself at some point. I don't know exactly when or why, but I think some part of her always understood that proof might someday matter, that in a world where paper means something, a girl deserves to have her life on paper. I sat on the closet floor with that folder in my lap for probably an hour. I brought it to the hearing. Judith reviewed it and said it was useful, but cautioned me not to expect miracles. I said I wasn't expecting miracles. I just wanted them to see who actually showed up. The morning of the final hearing, Vivien came downstairs while I was making coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept well, which made 2 of us. She said, "Dad, what's going to happen today?" I sat down across from her, thought about what to say, and decided the only right answer was the honest one. I said, "I don't know for certain, but I'm going to fight for you the same way I always have, and whatever happens today, you need to know that is never going to stop, ever." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded, got up and went to get ready for school. She had a math test and wasn't going to miss it on account of a courthouse. That's my daughter. The hearing started at 10. Gloria was there with her attorney. Her husband Gary sat behind her. I was at the table next to Judith, with the folder. The judge, the Honorable Raymond Forsyth, had the demeanor of someone who had heard every possible human story at least twice and was prepared to hear it again. Gloria's attorney went first, and he was very good at his job. He laid out the case cleanly: biological connection to the child's late mother, a stable 2-income household, no formal legal relationship between me and Vivien. It was structured and calm and hit every note it needed to. I sat there listening to the shape of my life described from the outside, which is a strange feeling. From the outside, I was a step-parent with no paperwork, in a dispute against blood relatives. That was the story the law wanted to tell. Judith made our arguments concise and sharp. She introduced the folder into evidence and walked through it item by item. Every form, every receipt, every school record, the emergency room visit, the passport application, 12 years of showing up documented. The judge reviewed it more carefully than I expected. He turned pages, went back to earlier ones. His clerk said something to him. He held up one hand without looking at her, not yet. And that's the moment I described at the beginning, that stillness in the room while he read. I didn't know what he was thinking, didn't know if he'd rule for me or against me. I sat at that table and tried to breathe normally and thought about the parking lot outside the soccer fields and the decision I'd made in my kitchen to keep fighting and hoped it had been the right one. Then the clerk came in from a side door and leaned down to say something to him quietly. He looked up and said there appeared to be a matter of the minor child wishing to address the court. Gloria's attorney objected on procedural grounds. The judge listened and said he had discretion to hear from the child given her age, 14, and that he intended to exercise it. Vivien came in. I hadn't known she was there. I found out later that she'd gone to school, gotten through her math test, walked out of the building at noon, taken the bus to the courthouse, and told the clerk at the front desk that she was the minor child in the Forsyth case and wanted to speak. I don't know what I would have said if she'd told me she was going to do this. I think I would have told her she didn't have to. I think she knew that, which may be exactly why she didn't tell me. She was wearing her school clothes, jeans and a blue hoodie with her soccer team's name on the sleeve. She looked younger than 14 and older than 14 at the same time. She sat down in the chair the clerk indicated, and the judge explained that she could speak if she wanted, that she didn't have to say anything she didn't want to say, and that he would listen. She nodded and folded her hands on the table in front of her, the same way Teresa used to fold her hands before saying something important. I noticed that. It landed somewhere in my chest. She said she understood why her aunt thought she was doing the right thing. She said she knew her aunt loved her mother and loved her, and that part wasn't in question. She said she knew there was a lot of paperwork involved, and that on paperwork she understood how things looked. Then she paused, looked at the judge directly, and said clearly and without any waver in her voice at all, "He's my dad." 3 words into the microphone in that quiet room. Not he's been like a father to me, not he raised me, not he's a good person. She didn't explain it or qualify it or apologize for saying it. She said it the way you state a fact that doesn't require anyone's permission to be true. He's my dad. I had to look at the wall, at the table, at anything that wasn't her face because I was not going to cry in that courtroom if I could help it, and I was very close to not being able to help it. The judge was quiet a moment, then thanked her. She nodded, stood up, and walked back out. What happened in that room after she left is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. What I saw on Gloria's face wasn't anger. It was something closer to grief. I think she heard Vivien say it and understood, maybe for the first time, what she was actually asking her to give up. Not just a person, but the only parent she had left. The one who knew how she liked her lunch, who had run behind her bike in the driveway, who had sat on the edge of her bed when her friend was cruel. Gloria had spent 7 months arguing that I wasn't Vivien's real family. Her niece had just told the room what was real. There was a brief recess. I stood in the hallway, not talking to anyone. Judith came and stood next to me, and we didn't say much. I looked at the door Vivien had walked back through and thought about her taking the bus alone and the math test. The ruling came a week later in writing. The judge cited Ohio's doctrine of in loco parentis, which recognizes the rights of a person who has functioned as a child's parent over time, regardless of biological connection. He cited 12 years of documented involvement. He cited the child's own clear testimony as to the nature of her relationship with her step-parent. He awarded me continued primary custody. I'm not going to tell you that was the end of the hard part because it wasn't. Things with Gloria were strained for a long while after. I don't hate her, I want to say that plainly. She did something that cost me 7 months, a significant amount of money, and a considerable amount of sleep, and she did it out of what she believed was love for her niece. That doesn't excuse it, but it's the true shape of it, and I can hold both of those things at once. She's also still connected to Teresa. I'm not going to cut that off just because she made a significant mistake, one made from the wrong kind of love, rather than no love at all. We don't talk much, Gloria and I, but she sends Vivien a card on her birthday and Vivien sends one back. That's something. Maybe it'll grow into more over time. Maybe it won't. I'm leaving room for it. Let me tell you about now, because now is the part that matters. Vivien is 15 and a half, and she's a person I genuinely like, in addition to loving the way you love your child, which sounds like a simple thing to say but isn't. She's sharp and funny and has opinions about everything from soccer formations to the correct way to load a dishwasher, and she's usually right and she knows it, which I find both impressive and occasionally exhausting. Last spring she made the varsity soccer team as a freshman. Her first game I was in the bleachers with a lawn chair and a thermos of coffee, the way I've been at every game since she was 7. When the starting lineup was announced and her name was called, she did the thing she's done since she was little, found me in the crowd first before she celebrated, before she talked to her teammates. Just found me and gave me a look that meant she'd done it, and I gave her one back that meant I know. Some things are just ours. You can't explain them to anyone outside of them. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not from the courthouse but from a few weeks after the ruling, when things had settled enough that life started to feel normal again. We were making dinner on a Sunday, our usual system, her on the salad, me on the stove. She was telling me about some situation at school, some social thing I was following maybe 60% of, and I was asking questions to catch up, and at some point I asked the wrong kind of question, and she looked at me with the specific expression teenagers reserve for parents who have just revealed their age. Then she went back to her salad and kept talking, and I kept asking questions, and we made dinner and set the table and ate it. That was the moment, actually. Not the courthouse, not the ruling, not the folder. That Sunday night in the kitchen, making dinner the same way we'd made it for years, the ordinary machinery of a family running exactly as it always had, unchanged. That was when I understood that what Gloria had tried to take wasn't something she could have actually taken, because it didn't live in a courtroom. It lived in a kitchen on Sunday evenings, and a bleacher seat at a soccer game, and a kid finding your face in a crowd before she celebrated anything else. The law could catch up with that, or it couldn't, but it was always going to be true. I've thought a lot about what Vivien said in that courtroom, not because I needed her to say it to believe it myself, but because I think about what it took for a 14-year-old to take a bus alone to a courthouse and sit in front of a judge and say something that simply, that clearly. She didn't ask my permission. She didn't wait for someone to invite her. She decided what was true and she said it. I'd like to think I taught her that, some of it, but she's always had that in her, that 4-year-old on the step stool who decided how things were going to be and then announced it like a settled fact. I found something else in that closet box buried under the folder that I didn't mention to anyone in the courtroom, a note handwritten by Teresa on a piece of notebook paper, no date. It just said, "He's the one. Whatever happens, he's the one." I don't know when she wrote it or what prompted it or whether she meant it as a message to me, to Vivien, or just to herself, a thing she needed to put in writing to make it fully real. But she'd folded it and tucked it under everything else in that box, and I think she always knew there was a chance I'd need to find it someday. I carry it in my wallet now. I've had it there since I found it. I've read it maybe 200 times, not because I needed convincing, I was never unconvinced, but because Teresa gave it to me, and it's the last letter she ever wrote, even if she didn't know at the time that it was. Being a father is not a biological event. I want to say that clearly because I think it's the thing this whole story is about, and I don't want to bury it in the ending. It's a daily decision. It's the lunch and the bike and the bleacher seat and the Sunday dinner and the question you ask when you can see on someone's face that something is wrong. You don't become a parent in a hospital room or a courthouse or on a piece of legal paper. You become one in 1,000 ordinary moments that accumulate into a life. If you have someone in your life who chose you, who showed up without being required to, who stayed without being asked, who built something real with you that has nothing to do with genetics, I hope you know what that is. I hope you've told them. Here's my question, and I genuinely want to hear from you. Was there ever someone who showed up for you when they didn't have to? Someone who had every reason to walk away and didn't? And did you ever tell them what that meant to you? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And before you go, one more thing, and this one isn't for me. Look up the foster care system in your state. Right now, there are kids sitting in group homes who are waiting for someone to do exactly what Vivien told that courtroom I did. It doesn't require paperwork. It doesn't require biology. It requires one decision made every morning to show up. That's the whole job. That has always been the whole job.